At the ADL Initiative, we understand that collaboration is an important aspect of our community, so every now and then we organize webinars to share information on important learning subjects. Today's focus is authoring xAPI profiles with the xAPI Profiles server, featuring Aaron Silvers of MakingBetter as our speaker. Aaron will walk us through developing an xAPI profile in two phases. One, to produce documentation that can be followed by repeatable outcomes, and one to author the JSON-LD document with the tool. There will be time at the end of the hour for Aaron to address questions, so if you have any, please type them into the chat for his team to review as he's speaking. Please note that the chat is open and visible to all attendees. If you know anyone else who would like to be added to our distribution list for these webinars, please feel free to have them reach out to us and we can add them to the list. This webinar will be recorded and made available on adlnet.gov. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Aaron Silvers. And I will stop sharing my screen so he can take it over.
Thanks, Liz. Hi, everybody. Happy holidays. It's been a lot of year, and I'm looking forward to being able to share with you all, at least, what I've been working on with the team. So let's get going. Here we go. So today, we're going to talk about a few things related to profiles. I want to talk at a high level a bit about the kinds of data engineering challenges that xAPI profiles just addresses. And then talk about, at least from a lot of the lessons learned that we've spent this last year, both building the profile server and building a lot of profiles, talking about the real need for having detailed specificity in order to enable both technical and semantic interoperability. We're going to then get into like how to kind of get started with profiles, and based on some hard lessons learned that we ran into, kind of talking about how well-defined problems are probably the best place for you to start in terms of how to make your first profile, and with a focus of how the problems are shaped by the things that are observable and how they block you from getting to know other things more specifically about a problem. And then we're going to wrap up with kind of a tour of all the features of the profile server itself and answer some questions about, like, things you're going to want to know, like when can you play with this fun toy that I'm about to show you. So here we go. So let's first talk about data engineering. Learning analytics generally has been kind of stuck to where it is today for the last couple of years. I've heard a lot over the last 7 or 8 years. When is xAPI going to take off? When is learning analytics going to deliver? And if xAPI is so great, how come, if it's all interoperable, how come I'm not getting all this great information out of it? Well, there's a lot of challenges that go with doing data well. Just even in any one concern, let alone trying to mix in from multiple different sources. Most folks don't engineer that way. So today, a lot of the time and resources that are doing the learning analytics work are all spent, a lot of that time and investment is all spent in just the data munching, just getting the data to generate and being able to read it and maybe do a report on it. And and for the most part, we spend a lot of our time focusing on just getting the stuff to move around. So from a Lean Six Sigma perspective, in terms of like all the things that we're spending a lot of time in, just the moving and the munging of the data, not really getting the value out of that data, and that's really the challenge that xAPI profiles is trying to tackle. Okay, so when we talk about that, let's talk about how profiles fit into the process of generating, storing, retrieving, and analyzing data. Okay, so profiles contain machine-readable information. All right, that's JSON-LD. That means JSON with linked data, and that informs a user's experience of their development environments. That could inform code libraries. It can inform authoring tools, and it can do that stuff dynamically, so that a data author is encouraged to create interactions that create conformant data. Now, much of the efficiencies that are going to be gained by xAPI profiles are going to be achieved by making such profile information widely available to learning record providers on demand via the profile server's API. Now, when it comes to storing, all right, that JSON-LD is going to be useful in imposing restrictions on what data is acceptable for a valid statement for a given learning record store. And that's going to be helpful, particularly in architectures that anticipate LRSs for process data. That's like kind of all the data that's going to be coming, clickstream, things like that. And then one or more milestone, capstone, roll-up LRSs, all right? So think about the ways, not just where your data goes today, but how you might want to route your data later. This is where xAPI profiles can be helpful in terms of how and where you store information and how you check for those things. Architectures that wish to filter what statements are acceptable for a particular LRS may want to keep a relevant profile cached for local operations, which makes things a lot faster and snappier. And then automate regular checks against an appropriate ADL xAPI profile server's xAPI or API for updates. That was a lot of things to say very fast. Now, when it comes to retrieving and analyzing data, that same JSON-LD informs both the learning record providers like simulations, adaptive assessment tools, and learning record consumers like learning management systems, talent management systems, reporting tools. It can inform them on the patterns of statements that are anticipated through conformant learning activities. Now, this information then can inform dynamic queries from learning record consumers. Again, these are like your reporting tools, right? This information can then inform automated contextually specific diagrams, charts, and reports. So architectures that might want to automate data management like that may want to keep the relevant profile cache for local operations, and then again, leverage that profile's patterns, its statement templates, and those determining properties to optimize that data retrieval with regular checks against an appropriate profile server's API for updates. So kind of, the summary statement on data engineering. This is going to take a lot of the heavy work off the shoulders of the professionals involved in data, in basically like the data storage and retrieval and processing and analysis today. More automation gives you more time to do more higher level thinking things like make sense of the data without having to waste a lot of time trying to make the data actually come together and make it reportable. So the specific value adds that the profile server adds here are an ability with one centralized resource to control statement structures. All right, this helps prevent garbage in and garbage out. All right, I think this might be where Dave Brubeck came into play. We'll just start right here. So I was talking a little bit about how wow, I was on a roll, like trying to restart again. So I was talking about how we spend a lot of time right now in learning analytics professionally. It's all on the engineering side. It's all on the processing of this data. It's not actually and cleaning it up. It's not actually on getting any value out of that data. Right now, we're mostly just working on still plumbing. We got higher level plumbing architectures with xAPI out of the way, but we're still installing faucets and pipes into people's houses more or less from a metaphoric perspective. So considering that, how do profiles fit in the generating, storing, and retrieval and analysis of this data? Well, we know that profiles can track help us define a bunch of things for xAPI, these rules, these approaches that we wish to take in an application context. All right. We can inform a user's experience of their development environments through this JSON-LD that we put out. And that encourages authors to create interactions that create conformant data. Now, much of the efficiency that we expect to see in terms of like the processing and getting to time savings and analysis, better analysis of xAPI data in general, we expect these efficiencies are going to mostly be gained right here in by cleaning up how we generate data so that we're generating good, useful data for the context in which we tend to use it. All right. By making this information widely available to learning record providers on demand with an xAPI profile server, we're going to be able to get into those authoring tools, get into those development environments, and make good things happen from start. Now, when we talk about storing information, The JSON-LD in these profiles is going to be useful in imposing restrictions on what data is acceptable for valid statements. So this will help with the routing of statements to particular LRSs. So example, in the education space, in the K-12 and higher ed space, there's a lot of research coming out of SOLAR, the Society of Learning Analytics Research, internationally, that really is looking for the value of process data in terms of like trying to unpack what learners are actually doing in a learning experience. Now, if you have process data needs where you're trying to analyze just from a course level what's happening with a student, but you also have more of a lifetime learning analytics approach that you're starting to mature to, where you want to translate some of these process data elements, these interactions, into more longer lasting things like assertions of competency, and how these assertions of competency may end up rolling up into the award of a certification or a badge, and how these certifications and badges may relate to a job or a job role. When you start getting into wanting to design our architectures like that, xAPI profiles are going to be very, very helpful in helping to route that data cleanly and control it and govern it in one space. Now, when we get into the retrieval and the analysis of that data, now we're talking about how profiles can inform learning record providers like simulations and adaptive assessment tools, and learning record consumers like learning management systems, talent management systems, reporting tools. The patterns of these statements that we design into xAPI profiles can be basically anticipate what the conformant learning activities are supposed to look like. So this information can inform dynamic queries from learning record consumers that are looking to be like more generic appliances in a learning ecosystem that can be used for a multitude of reporting approaches. So if you're looking to inform automated, contextually specific diagrams, charts, and reports, patterns are going to be helpful to you. By that same token, architectures that want to automate data management may want to keep the relevant profile cache for local operations and leverage those patterns, those templates, and determining properties to optimize that data retrieval. Okay, good. So again, a couple things that are of value that with a profile server. It will enable us to control statement structures. So with one centralized resource that can be looked up, we can enable software to assert necessary statement structure for controllable, uniform processing and analysis downstream. This prevents garbage in from becoming garbage out. We can communicate anticipated patterns, as I talked about earlier, by providing this information about how stakeholders identify groups of statements to be analyzed together. These patterns, it can express a chain or groupings of connected activities to express how a key performance is going to be indicated. Key performance indicated. That should be a really good hint for you that patterns and KPIs should be kind of like your mental connection. Put those things together. We can also filter with determining properties. Before we unpack statements to see what's actually in there and if it's useful or not, we can define determining properties about relevant xAPI statements so that these data consumers can quickly sort and select the relevant statements for processing. In other words, we don't have to unpack a statement to see if something inside it is something that we need. We can actually look at just the general structure of the statement, and with a couple little rules that we put in there, we can help narrow down what statements we're actually looking to get out of a LRS. But the biggest thing I think that the profile server is going to do, and I'm very happy to can't wait for you all to play this part, is that these clear workflows that we've put into the profile server that are designed into the profile server automate all the hard stuff, all right? All that JSON-LD, all the RDF map, stuff like that, you're not going to have to worry about that. We've made it basically as simple as searching, dragging, and dropping as much as possible to be able to find the things that you need on the server, put it into your application profile, and then build from that, go from that, and then coach you along the way in the interface in terms of the kinds of things, information that you might need to add or sort out. let's get into a little bit more here. So with great specificity comes great interoperability. So this is a lot of words, but basically they're in a supply chain of learning outcomes. Different people need different things from xAPI profiles. And I'm just going to kind of point out the kinds of people who stand to benefit from this, a profile server and profiles being a thing that exists and is real. Architects, learning architects, system architects, psychometricians, learning scientists. These are people who need xAPI profiles to express complex semantic rules for systems and humans, right? Project and product managers, they're not the same thing, but they have some similar needs. Learning experience designers, these are people who are going to design and are responsible for designing and delivering on sought learning and performance outcomes as a learning experience, all right? The people who are responsible for putting the systems together and to make sense of some of that are your system software engineers, your DevOps or your IT infrastructure, your business analysts. These are people who support the security, exchange, storage, management, and analysis of data, but in our case, learning experience data. And then there's the teams who the other technical folks, the front end and content developers and the quality engineers. These are people who support the quality generation of learning experience data. And all of them have a need. And in that JSON-LD that we put together provides different value propositions for those different audiences. And you can read on that on your own, but that's there. So what exactly do xAPI profiles specify? What do they specify with JSON-LD? Well, we can describe activities, all right? The specific interaction with an object by an actor in a statement. We can describe the activity type in a broader context. Think about a course, a video, a book, assessment, a competency, a job role can be an activity type. We can also talk about attachment usage types. This defines the type of usage of an attachment to a statement. For example, you might want to attach a certificate issued upon the completion of an e-learning course. You might want to have rules around that. We can also impact the documents in the state, agent profile, and activity profile resources of xAPI. Remember that xAPI is more than just statements. We talk a lot about statements here, but there's more the profiles can touch on, and that starts showing up in how we deal with documents. Extensions define a specific place of information to be expressed in the context, result, and activity extensions of a relevant xAPI statement. So you have a confidence score for a systemic assertion on a learner's records. You might want to link to the evidence that resulted in earning a badge. You might want to there may be any number of reasons why you want to have a property or, some value assigned to that statement, to certain types of statements. And extensions are the vehicle by which we can develop variables to do that. And verbs. These are the big ticket items. They define the intended action performed by the actor in an xAPI statement. But the questions, now that's just the JSON-LD. But the JSON-LD, as one might imagine, it's a lot of code-looking things. Most people, when they pick up a profile, they're going to want to look at the implementation guidance to understand what this profile is supposed to do. And they're going to have questions around architecture. What is the scope and purpose? What conventions are they going to have to follow? What are the human and automation things that are triggered by when certain things happen or are anticipated? There are business questions that a profile is going to have, an implementation guidance is going to have to answer for a profile. Contextually, what's the business case driving the profile? What is the intention? What's this supposed to do? What problem is this solving for people? Who is it solving it for? What requirements are going to need to be met for others to be able to review and test and to deliver the developed media? So it's not just about what I need as a developer maybe to implement and build this. How are people supposed to actually make sense of what I built? How do they know what good looks like? Again, what are the conditions for success, failure, and what are some other state information things that are going to be involved? And then from a data engineering perspective, all the stuff that we spend all our time now, we have to get that stuff nailed down in this documentation. What are the acronyms and terminology that I need to be able to follow this document? What are the patterns that are going to be important for people or systems? And how and where in the xAPI statement should competencies be expressed? And these are just some of those questions, right? Which gets us to, let's put some of this into context. A well-defined problem is going to make for a really good profile to get started, okay? So let's talk about why people want to make profiles. There's a number of reasons why you might want to make. They seem to all line up around automation and some kind of management. So there's automating tools of the state tools so that we can kind of just narrow down to the statements we want to use. We can automate tasks related to data engineering and data integrity and optimization. All right. So we're saving humans time in the workflow of working with data. And then we want to manage different contracts and contractors on the same efforts. Now, that's an actually really big business value that xAPI profiles and a profile server specifically can help with now. So let's say that you are the Air Force or the Navy, and you now have to run a program, the training program for different schoolhouses and different bases all over the country, all over the world, and you have multiple contracts running for the same giant program, training program effort that you're doing. How are you going to make sure that all of these different contractors that are working for you on this giant effort are producing data that you can actually use, all of it across the board? Profiles is how that's going to be able to make that happen, right? By managing changes for providers, for stakeholders, and impacted systems in one place, that's how you get to be able to manage this stuff at scale. So again, let's get into more of why do people want to make profiles? Sometimes it's to instruct contractors on what's required for conformant data. Sometimes it's defining just a small set of concepts to be used in a granular domain. Sometimes you want to normalize the data to be expected from interactions with a particular media type, like what's supposed to happen whenever I talk, what are the things that I should expect to be able to track with xAPI if I'm pulling in an audio file or a video file or a PDF or an EPUB or a Kindle book, right? I may also want to standardize how a professional certification program or an accrediting body's data is expressed so that, it's authoritative, so that reporting systems treat it specifically the way that they're supposed to. And I also might want to just make profiles just to learn about profiles, because learning by doing is what we do. So what projects are good candidates then for an enterprise to begin using xAPI profiles? I talk about using specifically, all right? This is like, there's a profile out there and profile servers are out there, and I want to start controlling data and having more governance over what's going on in my organization. So there's a number of projects that I think would be good first fits. Bespoke curriculum. If your company has training that is highly specific to your value proposition, and it's not something that you can find on the market, then that's probably a good project to get started with, because you're in complete command of the subject matter. If you are creating a certification program and you own that certification program, you own the material around that, then that's probably that's a great place to start, because you have known ways of organizing information already, and you can align these things. If you're dealing with data migrations, they tend to be highly contextual. So, which means that they're usually unique, but data migrations also tend to be big, giant, hairy projects with lots of different people working on them. You may want an xAPI profile to help manage that stuff. Same with enterprise collections, high stakes compliance training, the kind of like tooling, if you will, of different learning modalities, a mobile application for learning versus a web-based e-learning program. If you're managing multiple contracts for a complex project, and second and third party integrations. Now, if you want to start creating your first profile, let's narrow down that list a bit. So, all right. If you're going to create your first profile, like as a learning project, I would start with something far more scopable within your control. All right. I would start with either a bespoke curriculum, or I'd start with a second party integration. And then I'd start working into data migrations, and then work your way to managing a contract with multiple parties that are involved. Once you can do those things in kind of in that order, that level of complexity, then I think you're ready to really go to town on creating all sorts of profiles that you may need, but you also may not need to create any profiles. The goal of these is to be able to reuse these things, which we're going to get into. So let's talk about this in a more realistic perspective. I'm going to kind of very lightly and gingerly walk you through how I would approach solving a problem with a profile. All right. So let's talk about one way. This is the kind of errand way, if you will, to translate impacts and outcomes into an xAPI profile. So let's just start with a really basic question. Here's a question that I get asked all the time when I'm, sitting down with, stakeholders in a learning program. How do learners use our e-learning content? Well, this question is usually described with more specific questions. How do we know if they read something on screen? How are they using the resources that we provide? How are they navigating the content? Are they skimming or skipping the content? Right. So the first thing we need to do is actually define, what does use e-learning content mean? Right. We need to figure first, trying to frame the dimensions of the problem space in knowable ways. And dimensions are a word that's often related to analytics. And it always confused me until I started to really understand dimensions as being the dimensions of imagining a problem as a room, right? And the dimensions of the kind of really the shape of that room. And you are trying to understand the problem according to its shape. Is basically what it means when we're talking about dimensions of analytics. So when we talk about defining the use of e-learning content, what observable ways can we define that problem in? All right. So how do we know if they read something on screen? Well, let's break that down into something a little bit more. How do we identify everything a person might read in a course? What are the things they can even read? Do we even know that? Well, first we have to start by maybe distinguishing between instructions and directions. We might need to distinguish between assessment questions and rejoinders. We might want to also think about the different other things that people can read inside of our course. There's citations, there's different resources that they can click on. There may be multi-page resources, that you might want to monitor which pages they're looking at. And then there's also text that might be on a simulated monitor or a simulated page or a simulated electronic health record. There may be items within the learning experience that are interactable, and those things may have their own contextual rules to them. How are they using the resources that we provide? That's another way that we can talk about what does use e-learning content mean. So how do we identify everything a person might click on, drag and drop, tap, touch, swipe, draw, manually manipulate, and or type inside with a course? There's a lot of things that people can start touching if you start thinking through all the things that that a person may do with your course, and how would you even identify or define what it is they do when they do it. Thinking about those things is the first way to start thinking about what this problem might mean. So let's abstract that a little bit more. Figure out what patterns of statements are needed next by defining what interactions, and particularly the groups of interactions, describe what lies within the dimensions of the problem. For example, let's say that you're dealing with a scenario-based e-learning for combat nurses. What interactions would demonstrate reviewing a patient's chart? I would like y'all to use the chat window right now to actually enter in some answers to that. What your thoughts are? What are some interactions that what is a potential pattern of interactions? Just use verbs, if you will. You can make them up. That would demonstrate reviewing a patient's chart. I'm gonna break out of this for real quick, and I'm going to chop over to the chat window if I can and see what y'all got going on there. So observing is one, examine, inspecting. Look at that. Lesson's got a multi-part one. Look at that pattern. Pick up a chart, open the chart, look at the chart. Launched, reviewed. Good job, Nick. Oh, Nick, I'm so glad you're here. Yep. Open the chart, paging through, open, Yeah, you're getting it. You're starting to understand. You're easily seeing like that. There may be more than one thing involved when we start talking about these things. Let's go back. So one of the things that we learned over the last year, both through a number of different development and profile efforts, is that different approaches to data engineering are likely going to influence how you answer that question. So for example, if I think about what interactions would demonstrate reviewing a patient's chart, there are at least two ways this could be approached. I could have two different verbs, one for opening a chart, one for closing a chart, right? Now, it turns out that if I'm going to do real-time or almost real-time analysis, that approach is particularly useful for indexing and querying on that kind of demand. However, if I want to do interacted and I want to as one verb for all of the things that I may click on in a user interface, for example, maybe that interacted is a verb I'm reserving for the way in which a user interacts with navigation elements or the or the resources bar. And if I want to know what on the resources bar they interacted with, that may be a patient chart. It could be a close button. It could be a previous button. It could be a glossary button. It could be a next button. It could be the play and pause button. All right. But that would allow me then for longer term data archival, because it'd be more efficient for batch processing of the data, and it would be optimal for like NoSQL object storage, right? Whereas open and close would be better for like a relational, maybe better for relational databases, right? So my point is, when you're sitting down to think about this, it's not just an academic exercise. This is a cross-team exercise where you're talking with engineering, you're talking with tech, and you're talking with the folks involved in content and design, because everybody has to be able to make sense of the data that you're tracking and understand the picture that's rolling up to. So how do statements end up changing the value of things? Another thing you got to think through, right? So extensions can be defined in xAPI profiles to store and change the value of information you might need to change. These extensions can be made to the activity, the context, or the result of an xAPI statement. So for example, if reviewing a patient's chart means the same interacted verb would need to apply to both the button to open the chart and the button to close the chart, you might want to have a click target extension. And to do that, you would be like, your domain, your profile extensions variable. That's kind of what that would end up looking like, right? Now, in order to actually start putting this profile together, and this gets to be the fun part where I start showing you the server, what we start looking for, what parts of the puzzle are already put together. So we can use the xAPI profile to search for concepts that are relevant to our purposes. So for example, if reviewing a patient's chart relies on the interacted verb, because the user is interacting with a tab or button, right, we might want to search for interacted, right? In any case, search the profile server first. Now I'm going to switch over. Boom. Everybody can see the profile server. Liz, can you give me a short yes or no on that?
Yep.
Good. Awesome. So I've started putting together a little tiny, demo, pretty simple profile here. And the first thing I could do is I may want to add a concept, and I may want to add that interacted verb, right? So let's start first searching to see if there is an interacted verb. No results ever interacted. Well, let's say I want to do open and close. Well, that's not quite what I need. And those are definitely not what I need. So what this tells me is, now that I've searched the profile server, since I don't have these things, that means it's probably a good place for me to create, right? So if I want to now create a, create that, then what we're going to do is, one, let's add a concept. We've searched. We already know that's not there. So let's add a verb. I'm just going to do that so that I don't end up screwing something else up later on this little server. Now, I can add translations now or later. I could tag these terms, but basically that's all I need to do in order to add this verb as a concept. Boom, that's done. I could also add another one. Example verb for closed. And again, I can just add that to a profile. Boom, that's done. Now, I can pull those concepts into, well, I would have to publish them first, excuse me. But if those concepts were already shareable and published, I could pull them in. Otherwise, I could define them in here as well. So I could look for no statement templates. Again, I could add translation group, statement template. Boom. Now, when I do that, I could add, if I have an example already of this, I would put that in here so that people can reference what it's supposed to look like. If I wanted to add determining properties, I could make sure that the verb boom. Now it knows that in order to verify that this statement is the right statement, it has to have a verb that looks like this. And that verb is going to have this IRI with it. If it doesn't have that, it will fail. Cool? Kind of makes sense there. Let's put more of this into context, into a little bit more context for you. How does the xAPI profile server accelerate the development of an xAPI profile? It helps you find the right things. The searching prioritizes profile results while also exposing the templates, the patterns, and the concepts that match it. It allows us to see which profiles are actively used. Administrators can monitor the most viewed and the most exported profiles on the profile server, and all users can surmise the level of active viewership for any listed profile. We're building best practice into the tool. You can start a profile as simply as importing statements from a file or import an existing JSON-LD xAPI profile document. All right. With clear and explicit prompts, we can guide profile authors to define and refine their profiles. The concepts in a given profile that are defined by other profiles are clearly identified. I'll show you more about this in a sec. While generated IRIs are encouraged, once the root IRI is established, authors are always encouraged by default to use an external IRI to scope the namespace. In other words, we recognize the difference between you want to have control over asserting a namespace, but you want the machine, you want the tool to help you organize your profile doing its automated stuff. That's kind of the anticipated workflow that we designed to. So we're at the point now where we get to actually just do a full-on tour. Let me give you a highlight reel of what's going on. So there are several features of the xAPI profile server. I'm going to walk you through, at least show off what they are. These are accounts, working groups, profiles, the concepts, statement templates, patterns, search, administration, and APIs. Give you a taste of what we're dealing with. So let's take a look at an example. Oh, that's not where we're looking. Here we go. So let's first take a look at accounts. When you sign up, you're going to basically just sign up as easy as a name and an email address. Once you're approved, you're in. Once you have an account, you can create and join working groups. If you create the working group, you can invite others to join it. let's talk a little bit about working groups. Working groups are the ways in which we can collaborate and pass off ownership, if you will, or control, if you will, of xAPI profiles. There's always a danger in simple applications where everybody's treated every user is treated the same, where it's like, okay, we are, we're putting stuff into a profile, and boom, it's all up there. But if I get hit by a truck and nobody else knows my login information, then, oh, nobody can touch that profile ever again. I guess we're going to have to create a brand new profile. No, we don't want to do that anymore. We want to get past that stuff. So when you take a look at members, different members can then join different organizations, that they start or contribute to, all right? And those profiles then are in a category under their control and ownership. So ADL can have, as an organization, some command over their SCORM profile, their master object model profile, and other profiles. The video working group could have control over their video profile, for example. MakingBetter as a company might have its own proprietary profiles that it wants to expose to the public, and they can do that as well. And anybody can be doing those types of things as well. All right. So that gets us into our accounts. That gets us into working groups. Let's talk a little bit about the API. The API is how your engineers and your software developers and your vendors and your development environments and your automation and tooling are going to be accessing the information that's on the profile server. It's a pretty robust API, and I'm not going to read it all off to you, but it's there. You can go look at it. Let's get into some of the more fun profile stuff. Let's explore the different profiles. So you can see that there's different graphing and reporting that we can take a look. And this is obviously a demo server. It's not a live server. It is not for anybody to be using right now. But we can go into a profile like the master object model, and we can see all sorts of details. We can see a link to its documentation. We can see all the different statement templates that it can have. We can see how different templates may have one or more concepts associated with them, and some of those concepts may be things that are not even controlled by different profiles. So, for example, this master object model profile is making use of this terminated statement template, but that's coming from a different set of places than the master object mom profile, right? So we have profiles. We have statement templates. We have patterns. Now we can take a look at a pattern like completed, and you can see how there's launched, initialized, completed, terminated. Okay. But we can also, if you wanted to, look for a different type, just for funsies. Let's take a look at there's no existing patterns. That's right. Let's create a new pattern. And let's just create a sequence. This will be easy. So let's look for a launched. Let's look for opened. Launched. Just for funsies, just mostly to show you the cool stuff, you can drag and drop statements to create the sequence that you want. And then you can add that to your profile. And again, concepts, I walked you through kind of how we do that. You can create extensions, you create verbs, basically every concept that, comes into play are the kinds of things that we can do. So you may be asking yourself, when will the ADL xAPI profile server be available for download or for online use? Well, ADL just put out an article announcing this about 2 weeks ago, but it's coming in Q2 of 2021. I'm excited for this to come out, to be honest with you. So what does that mean? What's next for xAPI profiles? Well, I can tell you right now, there's a lot of activity happening in IEEE standards working groups. So related specifically to profiles, now the core xAPI standard is about to be released by IEEE, I think, in the Q1 of next year. That's super exciting already. It's a huge milestone to consider that, like in 2012, we really just kind of got this started. And now we're leaving IEEE standardization after 8 years. That's pretty amazing. But we have right now the JSON-LD binding is a standards activity for xAPI profiles, and that work's already begun. That is a working group that the PAR is, we're going to be meeting next week to try and vote on the PAR and get that into LTSC. But we're also going to put together a PAR for this implementation guidance. One of the biggest lessons learned that we had was, while the profile spec is really clear on what to do with that JSON-LD document, it's virtually impossible to actually implement that JSON-LD document unless you actually know what you're supposed to do with it, which means that you have to have very clear narrative, human readable guidance on what you're supposed to do with this information. And going forward, then, within that same set of working groups, all right, any individual profile that's going to go into IEEE standardization is going to be along that line. So anytime you see 9274.2, it's talking about profiles. So please get involved. The IEEE xAPI profile standards meetings happen every fourth Tuesday of the month. The next meeting is happening next week on Tuesday, December 22nd at 2:30 p.m. And if you want help with anything specific, talk to Megan, talk to me. I want to give a lot of shout out thank yous before we cut off and I start answering questions live. Normally, I know with ADL and these kinds of projects, like, the contract work, the work is kind of anonymous. It's all in favor of ADL. But in this instance, considering the impacts here, I really feel it's important to give specific, to show some gratitude at this time of year for the people that really made this thing come together. First of all, let's thank ADL. Without their vision, their investment, their care, their belief that these are the problems that really matter to professionals, in their stakeholders. Without that belief and that faith, we would not be where we are today. We would have never gotten off the ground in 2010. It is amazing to me that I've spent almost 20 years in this business, and I'm still working with ADL, and I'm still looking forward to more ways that we can work with ADL and open up the opportunities for innovation and technical infrastructure and learning, and really just kind of capacity building for this nation. I'm humbled that we get to play a part in this. Really need to thank Veracity Software. Those guys, Rob, Tom, Jason, Jono, Toby, and Keith, not a typo. Again, you want to talk about the power of relationships. We've worked and hung out and met and argued standards with these folks, again, for the better part of like 15, 20 years, most of us working with ADL throughout that time. But the most important thing for me from a career, achievement is, I think, at least from the Making Better perspective, our project was led entirely by a team of incredibly talented women. I want to thank Crystal Kubitsky for her UX research and design. I want to thank Eva Rendell for her amazing project management. And I need to thank Megan Bowe as the architect behind all of this, our technical lead, the vision, all of it. I may be the guy that you hear talking about this the most because I'm the guy with the mouth, but I'm really just kind of like the guy working in between the seams of these amazing folks. So thank you very much, and I'd be very happy to answer any questions that you have.
All right, thanks, Aaron. If you have a question, you can either type it into the chat, or if you have the ability to unmute your microphone, do so very carefully and ask Aaron a question.
Hi, Aaron. The terrific presentation, Michael Feldstein here. Very impressive. I do have a question about encoding pedagogical intent. I mean, this seems incredibly rich at capturing sequences of particularly low-level events from which we might be able to deduce what the learner is learning. But very often, if you're building a decent course, you've designed it to elicit some kind of evidence that the learner gets something or has a specific misconception. And that's a lot more meaningful in terms of a big picture analytics if you can capture that too. What can we do with xAPI and profiles and the profile server to do that?
Well, I would argue that, if you're building one bespoke course, you may not need a profile for that. But if that bespoke course is actually going to align with, let's say, a set of, I know this is outdated, but let's say it's a set of common core competencies, right? Or common core standards. You may want to have a profile to control the taxonomy, if you will, or the ontology of how those competencies and how those activities are canonically defined to be referenced in your work, right? So there's an aspect where profiles may be of help. Again, to build a custom profile for the one course you're going to do may be a little bit of overkill, but maybe not. It may be useful if you have multiple parties contributing work to that. It all really depends on the workflow needs that you might have. There's a couple different ways I could skin this cat.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean on a content perspective, although that would have been my next question. I meant, for example, a general pedagogical method in multiple choice question writing would be to write a distractor that indicates a particular misconception, right? Mm-hmm. That is a technique that runs across content domains, and right. Being able to see in my data flow that there are a number of students that have a particular misconception, whatever, mm-hmm. However I tie that to that indicator that, I want to encode that I am probing, and action is probing for misconception. So how can gotcha. Profiles help me with that?
So in that kind of case, Michael, I would probably think about defining extensions in either the activity or the result, maybe even the context, depending on where these decisions are being made, or these assertions are being made, I should say. And like, for example, if you are wanting to tag distractors that are presented, I would I would put in that into probably the result object for like an answered verb. And then in the answered verb, I might, break that down even further into like, okay, here's the relative weighting of that one distractor. Here's how we might code that, etc. I might create extensions so I can mark up those things in statements so that in the data flow, if I unpack it, that contextual information is there. That is the kind of thing we do with competencies, or Elsevier does with competencies in their CMI5 courses. Peter, you have a question. Or your hands raised, at least.
Yep. Hi. I hope you hear me, Aaron. This was a great presentation. Thanks a lot. On the other hand, most of the examples has been dealing with reasonably simple interactions. And in our project, and we work on large NSF-supported infrastructure for computer science education, we work with a lot of smart content, and users interact with smart content, not just like looking at something or clicking on something. They're solving problems, right? They interacting with worked out examples. There is a huge number of interaction, as I'm not quite sure to what extent the current profiles is applicable to that situation. Maybe we need something more complicated. And should we wait for the next generation of profiles which support smart content, personalization of things like that, or in fact, nothing is like that is being planned. So we'd rather need to meet you in the middle, start from our side, and then develop something which can interface with your profiles.
So Peter, as soon as any of us ever say that something else doesn't exist, so we have to go make it ourselves, that's always the damning, the axe that falls, where you absolutely know that somebody else is already doing this, and you just have no idea who it is, and you can't find them.
Yeah.
So my advice to you is, I wouldn't wait, because I can tell you from understanding the profile space, that is not an area that currently is canonical, doesn't exist. But I would also say that you won't be the only person to explore that. And this falls under the a kind of diffusion of innovations, Rogers kind of thing, where it's like, we're going to make messes until we understand the nature of the mess and then can clean it up.
That is great. Yeah.
Great question, though. Other questions? These have been really good, hard questions so far. 2 for 2. Give me more. No one? Michael Feldstein, one more question.
Yeah, I'll ask again if everyone's quiet. So getting back to the content domain that you're talking about before, let's say I want to teach a statistical method. I want to be able to dynamically pull in a piece of content that teaches a statistical method, and I'm doing that in potentially different contexts. One might be a psychology course, another might be a math course, right? And maybe the examples need to be different. Maybe the method is applied differently in those contexts, right? And this is quickly the thicket where we usually give up. And what I want to know, I don't expect you to have an answer to this question, but I wonder if you can give me a window through the thicket about how one might begin to think about creating a network of contextual links that can eventually give me a directed graph that's useful.
I think I would need to understand the specifics of the problem a bit better to understand, to be able to start figuring out how I would approach that.
Yeah. So again, let's say I find out that you have a particular misconception about a statistical method, right? And I go out and I see I've got a collection, I've got a community, and I've got a collection of statistical method learning objects that are tagged to support this sort of thing. But they were created by a whole bunch of people in a whole bunch of contexts, right? And I want to narrow down that world of contexts to one that's closer to mine, so I can look and say, yeah, this is a psych course problem. So I want to look at statistical methods, learning objects that are related to this particular context. How do I begin to get my community of content creators to create the kind of metadata using xAPI statements that I can begin to ask those questions? Is that clear?
Yeah, I think so. So, this obviously is a very subjective answer. So, the way I would approach this, Michael, is I would, one, get those stakeholders on a call and start. But before I do that, I would probably do a little bit of legwork on making some rough, I would say, just some initial assertions about the ways in which things might be aligned across a couple of different exemplar learning activities that you're looking at, just to get the conversation started so that there's a little bit of structure there for people to poke at. It doesn't have to be right. In fact, it's probably better if it's wrong, if the model is wrong, so that people can tell you how wrong it is and then maybe help you figure out what right is. But the profile server might be helpful in documenting decisions that you come to around that stuff and putting it into at least, as a version to play with and start using. But it is a tool as part of that conversation. It's not going to solve the problem for you. That is definitely it's a people making decisions as a group kind of workflow, or it's a person or a group of people as a core set of stakeholders making decisions in more of a command and control, like thou shalt do these things, and everybody else is subscribing and does them, which is kind of how a lot of government contracts end up working, and those work efficiently as a result of that. But when they happen, but when you're talking about what you're talking about, where it's all still kind of new and baked, this is more about creating those conversations and having a means to be able to normalize how you're having that conversation with different groups.
All right, Aaron.
Balthazar.
Yep, I was going to say, you've got one more hand raised, and I just wanted to let everyone know we are past the 3 o'clock hour, so if you're late for another meeting, just letting you know. And I think this should be our last question of the day, right?
Cool.
Hey. Hi, Aaron. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was great.
Thank you, Balthazar. ¿Cómo está?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Yes, I think it's a wonderful opportunity, this editor, to creating and evolving collaboratively, profiles for the one that we are using with serious games. It's really, really useful also for opening up a discussion in the community. For instance, now we need to extend it to geolocalized games. So it's really interesting because our solution, and also this is helping us very much to do very large experiments with thousands of students and doing the analysis near real time and of course offline. So, okay, when we can play with it, so we can open it for the discussion with the community, because it will be lovely to be ready for the next summer, or way before that, because in that case I can promote it in the Learning Analytics Summer Institute, where we will be giving a tutorial. So it will be lovely to have this available on time, not in time, I will say, not on time.
Right. No, I agree. No, thank you. That's one, very, very happy to hear that these are helping, and I would only encourage you, Balthazar, to email your folks at email and call your folks at ADL and see if they might want to get that profile server out there sooner. I don't know.
Go for it.
Well, since this is probably our last chance for being able to talk to everybody before the holidays, please have a happy holiday. Stay safe. Happy New Year. I look forward to working with all of you into the new year as we standardize xAPI profiles. And please show up for the profile meeting next week on Tuesday, 2:30. Thank you all.
All right, thank you, Aaron, and thank you everybody for attending and asking questions. If you are interested, we have another webinar happening next month, January 26th, on the Enterprise Course Catalog. So you can find that at our webinars page on adlnet.gov. All right, and thank you. Have a good day, everybody.